Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to the long-awaited return of God of War to the channel. My god, I've missed this, and it's been a very long time coming. Now, with us still having of course come off the most recent PlayStation State of Play, we did of course have some pretty huge news regarding the future of God of War after years of silence. That's in the form of the God of War Trilogy Remake, as well as the sleeper release of God of War Sons of Sparta. With that said, let's actually hone in on the God of War Trilogy Remake, the confirmed details we have surrounding it right now, as well as my own personal thoughts and feelings on it, kind of discussing my hopes and worries moving forward. Now currently, what we do know of the remastered trilogy is that the original voice actor for Kratos, T.C. Carson, has finally returned to reprise his role for this. And bear in mind, this is after a 13 to 14 year hiatus away from the role, so it's been a long time coming since God of War's Ascension. Whilst on the surface, this may not seem like anything really crazy, in many ways, especially for older fans, this is an incredibly beautiful moment for Carson, because it was made no secret that upon the series' soft reboot in 2018, Carson was largely left in the dark about Kratos' recasting with Christopher Judge. But despite the circumstances surrounding this, it has been super cool to see those fences be somewhat mended, as he himself did appear alongside Judge during the 20-year anniversary of the series, and there does seem to be a lot of love and respect between the two, as Judge has gone down on record refusing to voice the younger version of Kratos in Valhalla out of respect for Carson. So I think it's really cool that both actors can allow both iterations of the characters to coexist here. That stuff's really cool, and in many ways it does feel like the cast reunion did lead up to this. But what else has been confirmed here? Well, on the musical side, we know that Bear McCreary will be returning as the leading composer for this trilogy, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, considering his stellar work on the series from 2018 onwards, and I do really think he's a great pick, especially with how he brought back the original theme during the course of Valhalla, kind of capturing that grandiose and rich tone. I think he's a really stellar pick for this. Now, it's in terms of narrative and gameplay where things get a little bit dicey here, as the finer details surrounding this haven't really been confirmed since the reveal, with it at best only kind of being merely teased at. And as of making this video, we don't know in what capacity and how true or faithful this remake will be to the original story, nor how will its gameplay function. And the reason I say this is how it's being framed as a remake. Is it a remake as in an actual upscaled HD version of older games? Or is it an entirely new fresh take on the game, built from the ground up in the same vein as, let's say, a Resident Evil 2? So what's kind of going on there? Well, if I'm gonna throw in my 2 cents into this, considering the return of T.C. Carson, as well as an entirely new addition to the Greek saga of games through Sons of Sparta, it wouldn't at all surprise me if this was indeed a from the ground up remake of the original trilogy. Keep in mind that nothing yet is confirmed, but I'd consider that somewhat writing on the wall. I think it's safe to assume that this is a from the ground up remake of the original, as they did use the term remake instead of remaster, which is usually described for like HD remastered ports. Now, in terms of known information currently, this is all that's been confirmed from the studio. Thus, I don't think we'll get any actual big bits of information until we get to something like a Summer Games Fest or a Game Awards like ceremony. And even then, in terms of release, nothing's been said about how the trilogy is going to release itself. Like, is it going to be one full installment where 1, 2, and 3 are somewhat combined together? Or if it will be individual separate releases each? We simply don't really know right now, and things continue to be incredibly ambiguous, with us more or less probably not really knowing much about that until we get a real preview of the game itself. But seeing as next gen is only a few years away at this point, we definitely shouldn't void the idea that a PlayStation exclusive title of this caliber won't be utilized as a launch title. Also, hi everyone, future History Behind the Warrior here, and basically whilst I was in the middle of editing this video, we did get some somewhat leaked news through Christopher Judge at a panel when he was asked about the status of the God of War remake. Now mind you, considering that this is a leak, somewhat spoilers ahead, so I will have a timestamp here you can click on if you do wish to jump ahead and go in completely blind. But when Judge was basically asked about what exactly was going on, he more or less confirmed 3 key details here. One is that he would not be returning as the character for this remake trilogy, as it would of course be voiced by TC Carson, something we all kind of expected here, as it does explain his return to Santa Monica Studios, and that supposedly the God of War Trilogy Remake would have new combat, new content, and a completely new system. As to what this could really entail, we simply don't know right now, but it's very much so interesting that we do have some more details about this. Because is it new as in a complete rehaul of the older system, or is it simply new to Christopher Judge? Because the Norse series of games play largely very different to that of the Greek series. Things won't be crystal clear up until we get a real proper reveal, but if I was to put my money on it, I would generally expect an entire overhaul of the system here. As it would also explain why Santa Monica Studios has largely remained silent since the release of Valhalla for so long, probably reworking the foundation from the ground up. And the new content stuff generally sounds really awesome here. It's something I do touch upon a little bit later on in the video, but I do think that's generally really good, especially when it comes to remakes. And of course, the last and final detail here, and one that I am actually the most excited for, is that supposedly Santa Monica Studios will be unveiling their next big game during this summer. As to what this game could be, we don't currently know, as we know that behind the scenes, they have been working on the supposed Atreus spin-off and or another God of War installment. But there most recently has been a tweet from Christopher Judge after all of this news came out and started circulating to somewhat clear the air on this situation, with his tweet saying the following: "Let me be crystal clear, I have zero involvement with the original games and what they involve. Full stop. As much as I love that everything I do in the future would involve Santa Monica Studios or God of War, I have other projects that I'm super excited about. More info this summer." Now, whilst he doesn't outright confirm that we will be getting a new game, considering what he said about the summer, and that we are expected to get some more details about the Trilogy Remake around this time period, I most certainly believe that a reveal is on the horizon here, with it more than likely a follow-up to the Norse series of games, considering that we're still yet to get any news about the Atreus spin-off, so it makes sense for him to say why to keep an eye out on the summer. And this is the only current confirmation we have right now of another project that the studio is working on beyond the Trilogy Remake. Now, take what you will with this information, as we're more than likely a few years out from a sequel and follow-up, but it's still something worth mentioning here. Just bear in mind that Christopher Judge is not part of this project, so we don't truly know how much he actually knows about it, only simply what is stated here. Anyway, back to the video, which now more or less does bring me on to my own personal thoughts and feelings on things. And I will say, after how long it's been since the last God of War, I'm genuinely very excited about this, especially with the return of Greece after the conclusion of the Norse games and Valhalla. It kind of creates an interesting reverse prequel sort of thing. But naturally, I do have my worries and reservations about this, because this is a really ambitious project that can go like one of two ways. So positives first before anything else. In general, I do think this is an extremely good thing for God of War, as the original trilogy of games as a whole are an incredibly important focal point in PlayStation's history, and I do think do stand the test of time. So in the modern age with the current tech we do have, a remake is definitely something the series deserves. Something that's long overdue in my opinion, especially seeing as there's a large chance that a lot of the fanbase hasn't had the opportunity to experience those games beyond the Norse duology. Sure, you can stream it on your PlayStation at 480p, but really the best way to experience those games in high definition is through a PlayStation 3 emulator, and not everyone kind of has a PC to experience that. And even then, your best option is to probably play it on a PS3 with a then at the time HD version of those games. So in that regard, I do think something like this is good, and most certainly something long overdue. And also, bear in mind, if these Greek games do well, we may see this love and approach be given to games like Chains of Olympus and even Ghosts of Sparta. Games that, in my opinion, are are really underappreciated, as they were largely bound to the PSP and simply fell out of the scope and scale of the original trilogy. Plus, bear in mind, if we're doing 2.5D games, I wouldn't mind a reimagining or retelling of God of War Betrayal. That's yet another thing that's long overdue, and something that I do feel is tailored to that style. Now, in terms of story, I believe that narratively, this gives them a lot of freedom to expand on the foundation that was already there. What I mean is that whilst those games have established storylines and plot lines, we gotta remember that these games did release on the PlayStation 1, 2, and 3. Games that were kind of largely limited with the amount of content you could put on a disc at the time. Since then, of course, tech has gotten significantly better, and I really do think that this is a great opportunity to restore, or at the very least, reapproach some of the cut content from the games at the time. It gives them that window of opportunity to kind of flourish out that creative vision a little bit more, as they were largely held back by their technical limitations at the time. I think that if this is a reboot, or at the very least a retelling of an older story, we should be adding to the overall intended experience, given that it is a second chance at making these games, therefore kind of fulfilling that creative vision. Like, for example, the Chimera was originally supposed to appear in God of War 2, but did wind up being cut and saved for free. I'd be interested to know and see what was the Chimera's purpose in the first place, before it was pushed back. Stuff like that, generally really cool. And along with this, I know that Cory Barlog has gone on record saying that he wished he had changed some narrative decisions, such as Gaia, just to allow for a more tighter-knit narrative. And as long as that doesn't affect the overall story, I wouldn't mind seeing something like that adjusted if it's quite minor. And I think with TC Carson's inclusion, we have a great opportunity to maybe add more lines and more characters to Kratos to give us more depth and understanding to that character at that point in time, where he was at like the peak of both his grief and his tyranny. It'd be a very interesting contrast to see for modern audiences that understand why Kratos was the way he was in the 2018 game, why he kept his past so secretive. So again, I think this sort of approach can be really good if it's taken in the right direction. But with that said, I do have my problems and worries with this creative decision, and understandably concerns about a remake of these games. Because on a gameplay front, this is probably gonna go in one of two ways, and will largely be the most divisive element of this remake. Because you're basically in one of two camps at this point. Because if you wish for it to be faithful to that of the original games, then you're largely opting for fixed camera angles, as well as probably the old control scheme. But then there's the more modern approach that draws influence from the 2018 games onwards. And this has largely been the center of debate since its announcement. Do you follow through on legacy, or do you add something a little bit different to the experience? Admittedly, whilst I do think that the older control scheme is very outdated, as games just don't play like that anymore, it doesn't really mean it's bad or didn't work for the time. If anything, a remake could help polish and iron out some of those problems there, giving newer fans to experience something that's quite different to the norm, kind of like the purpose and reason behind a remake. But in also saying that, if you've already experienced those games, you may want to have a different approach with how that story is told. Hence how the 2018 direction may be stylized for more of a cinematic experience. There's good arguments for both sides of this. Me myself, I'm really happy with either option here. But I think there's a way to somewhat accommodate to both audiences, but it runs the risk of it being maybe a bit too different, and tailoring itself a bit to either side without fully committing to it. From a visually cinematic perspective, I think it's fine if they want to reapproach certain shots, if it helps add to the grand scale and scope of things. Something that Trilogy was quite infamous for. You can do that without having it affect the gameplay. But now we come to the question of, do we do fixed camera or third person perspective? Well, unfortunately, this is where I think we got to be kind of realistic of our expectations from a PlayStation exclusive title. Because here's the thing, do I think the old style of combat will be returning with fixed camera angles? Well, as much as I myself enjoy that style of game, I don't really think so. But I do think there is room for it. We'll get to that in a bit. Due to PlayStation's current reputation of blending both game and film together, that will more than likely take priority here. which is one of my worries and concerns. Because a fight of this scale against Kronos, whilst clearly possible, and has been done in some capacity, isn't quite as complimentary of the character's scale. One of the reasons why the fixed camera angle worked so well isn't just to set up the scale, but show the vast terrain surrounding this battle. It put things into a larger perspective. But I think they need to find a way that can hybridize that style, taking the best elements of both sagas, whilst allowing it to homage what came before it, as well as how it does function now. If the gameplay loop is going to be based around the 2018 games, I still 100% do think that there should be certain hallway segments and arenas that have fixed camera angles and sections, at the very least paying homage to those older games, which then later builds up into a large boss fight, so the change does pay off here. It's fulfilling and encapsulates the spirit of the older games. So whilst I'm okay with them doing the 2018 format, they absolutely should have segments like this, because that's akin to what those older games captured. In many ways, it's like the fine middle bridge in between both sagas, allowing older fans to experience what they remember, whilst also allowing the Norse Saga fans to experience something a bit new, maybe something in turn that would make them want to try the older games just for that reason. I think it scratches both itches and is complementary to each other, but like, you gotta do it really well. Because if you're catering to both audiences and you're double dipping, you got to make sure it works. Because if you don't, then you wind up upsetting both sides of the fandom. Plus, something that I feel like I need to say, they absolutely should not pull their punches in this game. What made the Greek Saga of games so special is just how brutally unapologetic they were in their brutality. It is like their peak of hyper fantasy and player empowerment. As much as I love the Norse Saga of games, I don't want to be told how strong Kratos is. I want it to be reflected with how he interacts with his enemies and the world itself. I want the QTEs and sequences show me that he is as strong as he is. He needs to embody that brutality and savagery. That is something that the remake should deliver and not hold back on. And I mean everything. If you know, you know. But arguably my biggest problem is that it's a reboot and a prequel to some people. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing, mind you. I think a re-release of the Greek games is well deserved, and Jesus Christ, we should have gotten this sooner. If I'm honest, in between this waiting time for the remake to release, they should shadow drop a HD remaster of the first 3 games. But in my mind, we should be moving forward with the series and not back. I know Santa Monica is currently working on 2 other projects, one being another possible God of War, and the other being the Atreus game, or supposed Atreus game, or a different IP, we don't really know. I just right now don't want the series to be in a bit of stagnation, or be put in a position where, and I know this is a little bit of an out there drag, kind of thrown into the endless vortex of The Last of Us, so to say, where instead of getting a sequel or any form of new media, we get a TV show and reboots on remakes and re-releases of the same game over and over again. I really don't want that for God of War. In my mind, I think we need something new moving forward, or at the least something else, during the remake of the Greek Saga. I know some people like to act like his story should end here, because Kratos completed his arc, or that they've somehow written themselves into a corner, but did we play the same series of games? The Norse Saga of games did wonders in terms of world building and expanding the lore beyond its established parameters. The return of Tyr alone is a perfect vessel we need for undertaking such a possibility. His incarceration means that he was long and far overdue to revisit some of those other lands and gods. Keep in mind, different pantheons and worlds operate on different times. And with Kratos having brought hope to the war-torn lands of the 9 realms, maybe Tyr believes that he can do the same to others. I think this neatly aligns with Valhalla's ending, marking it not so much an end to Kratos' story, but ushering a new era that allows others to see him as the god he wants to be, to have him live up to the mural that they painted of him. But now it's simply time to test that metal and see how such will is measured. As a whole, I think there's a lot of promise within this premise, especially with the flexible nature of it, and how pantheons can be approached and written differently, but I do desperately think we need a sequel moving forward. Not that it's bad we're getting the remake, I'm equally as excited for that, but yeah, I just don't want God of War to be put in this somewhat loop where we're just kind of limited to ports of the same game over and over again. With that in mind, the Greek Saga was desperately needed of a facelift, but I also don't want it to come at like the expense of the series moving forward. Because come PlayStation 6, I don't want God of War 2018 or Ragnarok remastered, I want a new game. So with that said, and my own thoughts covered here, what are your own thoughts on the God of War Trilogy Remake? What are your hopes? What are your worries? What are your own personal wishes for this possible return to form? And of course, which god's ass are you most excited to kick again? Please do comment down below, because I'd really love to hear what you have to say. I feel like opinions on this are going to be different from person to person, so I'd be interested to hear what a lot of you have to say. But until the next one, everyone, that's been it for me. Take care, everyone.